right. All right, sounds good. We'll go ahead and get started as it's 2:01. So yeah, let me see if I can. Thank you, Craig. All right. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and I'll start my webcam. There we go. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today to learn how to start a local homeless coalition. So I'm your host for the next hour and a half, roughly. I'm Jen Beardsley, and I have the pleasure of being the local homeless coalition coordinator here at Texas Homeless Network. So just so everyone knows, this is being recorded, so smile, you're on camera, but you're also not on camera. All right, so let me see. All right, so everyone can see the main chat to the right of the presentation. You can, at the very bottom is where you can type in questions and answers. I see Craig is typing now. But let's see, we're gonna have a little icebreaker. So what do you consider yourself? Pretty much everyone is like a talker or a listener depending on the situation, right? But generally, which do you consider yourself, a listener or a talker? Nice. Like Craig's answer. Nice. So, ooh, a lot of listeners. And nice, talker is good. Yeah. So while you're taking a minute to type your response into the chat, we'll go ahead and look at the agenda. There we go. Okay. So today we're going to cover a lot of material, specifically what local homeless coalitions are, how they can address community homelessness, and how to get started. So in some cases, there will be more on the slide than what I will say, or I put in the information because I wanted you to be able to come back and look at it for future reference. So if there's a lot on the slide and we don't spend a ton of time on it, don't panic. You will have access to a copy of the PowerPoint, and you can reach out to me with questions we don't get to. And you can also download a copy of today's PowerPoint in the far right-hand corner at the bottom, if you'd like to. All right, so this is essentially a 101 course. So we're covering the basics here, and most importantly, setting expectations. So before we move on, a bit of housekeeping. I ask that you drop questions you have into the chat. I'll hold questions that will take a lengthy answer at the end. But if I can answer something quickly, I'll address them as we go. And so the wonderful Craig, James, and Denise, and maybe later Tegan, thank you so much for our local homeless coalitions joining us today. I'm super excited you're here. And you all can also field the questions that come up in the chat. Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So what are local homeless coalitions? All right. So before we define that, I'm going to let you all know that I am on a team within Texas Homeless Network. So there's basically two teams. And I am on the team that is tasked with partnering with communities in the orange to address homelessness. So one of the ways we help communities address homelessness is through my job, which is to help volunteers in those counties come together to organize to address homelessness more effectively as a community. And I'm going to emphasize that I said volunteers because there is unfortunately currently no funding for developing local homeless coalitions. But we'll discuss throughout the presentation why it's definitely worth the effort and, quite frankly, years it takes to fully develop an LHC. And I might say LHC or coalition, just know LHC just stands for Local Homeless Coalition. I'm sure you already knew that, but I like pointing out the obvious. And thank you in advance for all of your hard work, or even just showing up to this presentation. I want you to know that we're here for you, and though we don't know you, we love you and appreciate you so much. You have no idea. Some of our volunteers are some of the hardest working people in Texas. All right, so there we go. All right. So local homeless coalitions are catalysts to addressing homelessness within a designated geography, such as a city, county, or cluster of counties. I usually recommend starting out in a city or county and caution against going beyond where you have existing personal networks. So after you do your community research, which we're going to touch on later, you do have the option to scale your LHC down further and focus primarily on project development if you find that is what is needed and doable, as long as you are also gathering local data. We usually say countywide data by conducting the annual point in time count, which is the annual count of people experiencing homelessness every year. So for example, Brown County Home Solutions, which is in the middle of the state, primarily focuses on tiny home villages for people experiencing homelessness, but they also conduct this count every January, which is required of local homeless coalitions. So we can talk more about that later on if you have questions about that. All right, so who makes up an LHC? Pretty much anyone, but especially those that come into frequent contact with homeless individuals, so like your shelters, homeless service providers, folks whose policies directly impact people experiencing homelessness, so like city councils, right, they can criminalize or decriminalize homelessness. Public housing authorities can prioritize people experiencing homelessness, and obviously law enforcement can be a good group to engage over time. And you definitely want to do your best to include people experiencing homelessness or those who have lived experience, because they can tell you the gaps and strengths in your current system, like firsthand. So you also want a mixture of those who are actually, quote, like doing the work, such as like case managers, or if you're like in a small rural community, like street ministries or faith community front desk staff, they get a lot of calls for assistance. And also you want the people that have the power to make decisions, such as executive directors. So you do not, just to clarify, you do not have to receive federal or state funding to form a local homeless coalition. You can just be people with passion. We definitely welcome them. All right, so let's see. So before we move on, I wanted to open up the first poll to see how you all feel about the speed. 1 for too slow, please speed up. 3 for just right, and 5 for too fast, please slow down. Another second. Looks like it's good. I'm gonna do like call it the alligator of like time. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Okay, got a few in at the same, okay. All right, so I'll keep going at this speed. So I'll try to slow down a little bit. Okay. Actually, I'll just keep at this speed. It looked like that's where everybody was. All right, so how can local homeless coalitions address community homelessness? Largely, the coalitions can come together to achieve basically social change over the course of years, mostly by building relationships and trust among members, and also with the community. And most importantly, getting on the same page about what actually solves homelessness. So bear in mind, this work can take 1 to 3 years to get the right people to the table and to develop a common agenda, because you're building buy-in to the best practices that end homelessness. But you can establish like a shared vision or aim early on. Like if you see that there's no awareness of homelessness in your community, you can make education and raising community awareness like your aim early on, so you have something to focus on. Okay. And in the slide, like I crossed out organization because you want to approach managing this as like a network or an ecosystem. So to help authority figures kind of think differently, you want them to understand that our job is to serve the vision or the purpose. So not what's best for my agency. I mean, that can be usually what comes from working toward and prioritizing the shared vision and purpose ends up helping the agency. And we'll talk about how that works later on. So the locus of thinking really needs to be on what's best for the network and people experiencing homelessness. So you can do that by like giving credit to others, like really emphasizing crediting the people that you partner with and sharing credit. Like if people see your organization giving credit and supporting others, people will view you very favorably and want to work with you. And people over time will know that you can pull folks together to achieve or work towards something. So definitely emphasize that. All right, so don't worry about understanding this slide right now. This is more like a long-term look, what you're kind of aiming for. In the long term, and I'm talking about like 5 to 10 years, like the model high-functioning LHC reduces service duplication. So for instance, you don't have 10 groups giving out meals and socks in like a 5-mile radius. Like that would be considered severe like service duplication. LHCs, in addition, like LHCs reduce local competition for funding by coming together over the long term in like the future, once you've established that communication and trust, to sort out which agency is best positioned to operate which program or programs. By serving as like a platform, the coalition serves as the platform where agencies can come together and coordinate to determine which agencies would be most likely to be awarded which grants. So you don't have multiple agencies in your community competing for like one grant. So this kind of collaboration, like deep collaboration, makes communities more competitive for grants, both public and private, because when those individual agencies that are members of the local homeless coalition apply for funding, they'll be able to demonstrate that they're not working in isolation and that their program meets a need without duplicating an existing resource. So the goal here is to kind of get out of that competitive mindset and move toward like what's called like an abundant mindset, like thinking of the whole community and how we can, like we fit in the puzzle piece, and then going from our strengths and stuff like that.
Hey Jen, real quick,
so,
just a reminder, since this is 101, spell out your acronyms.
Oh yeah, what acronym did I say? Did I?
I just covered ESG.
Oh, you mean the funding, yeah. Gotcha. I wouldn't worry about funding too much right now. These are basically grants you can apply for. I did have them spelled out initially, but then it was like super crowded on the page. So just like keep in mind those acronyms refer to grants, but you don't need to worry about them right now. If you do want to learn more about them, you can, EFSP, that's like Emergency Food and Shelter Program. And I think that's like designated, I don't think you apply for that. I think I got that wrong. So I think that's like doled out by need. But anyway, yeah, so that's why I put do not worry about understanding this right now. But yeah, thank you, Craig, for calling that out, because just in case I have more acronyms. Okay, so the community benefits of LHCs. Evidence shows when agencies collaborate more deeply and are better connected beyond referring clients to one another, clients are more likely to exit homelessness faster. And you move to that like deep collaboration through like having a shared idea of best practices through common education. So you can use the coalition as a platform for like watching webinars if you would like, if your group decides that's what you want to do. You can also, you're also tracking community data, which we'll talk more about later on. And also making sure the most important thing, right, like a unified view of the system, the resources you have, and the best practices and actual solutions to homelessness. So yeah, coming together to get that shared understanding of best practices can be really powerful in the community and getting that community buy-in. There we go. Okay. Yeah, and the most important thing, centering people experiencing homelessness as best as you can, whether that's like recruiting members with lived experience or conducting focus groups when you have a way to like compensate folks for their time. Make sure you're trying to like include those with lived experience in an intentional way. So you can have separate, if you recruit a member who has lived experience or is currently experiencing homelessness, you can have a separate conversation with them outside of the meeting as to how they would like to have their voices heard or their voice heard, and like what suggestions they have, like what would make them comfortable giving feedback and stuff like that. And that's like definitely a relationship you're building. Like they're not immediately going to have like, you know, you're all figuring out how to work together. So just being really patient with yourself, being really patient with all the people you're bringing to the table, that's like a really important component. So just to recap, intentional engagement with unhoused folks, it can definitely benefit LHC members too, because you can better position agencies to design or adjust their programs with their clients, which can be really powerful when you're making a case for funding. So, I mean, you know, self-interest is a real thing, but we definitely want to make sure we're centering the people experiencing homelessness and including their voices in our coalitions. Yeah. All right, so getting started. All right, so before you do anything, definitely check to see if there are existing local homeless coalitions in your area, which those are linked in the PowerPoint. And also you can look up other groups that might already be doing the work that you're interested in doing. If you've already created a separate group and you discover there's a group doing exactly what you're doing, you don't have to have a turf war. You can have conversations and talk about ways you can join forces, because we definitely need a lot of, as many allies as we can get in the communities. And it also, just on a quick note, it's okay if there are two coalitions doing different things in a community. Just make sure you're trying to like communicate with them regularly, like checking in and opening up opportunities for engagement. For instance, in Beaumont, there is a local homeless coalition focused on like the county and like bringing together those agencies, and there's also a coalition focused on just establishing a shelter in Beaumont. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the second poll. So I'm going to ask you folks to talk. Okay, so we're going to, if I can find the poll. Oh, I was in the wrong thing. Okay. All right, so I want to know what stage you're in. If you're on your own, if you already have a group going, if you're just like talking to people, or if you're already part of a coalition. And so while you all answer that, we're going to hear from our lovely guest speakers. Let me go to the next slide. All right. And we have Denise Cornegie from Lamar County Homeless Coalition and James Bell from the Ellis County Homeless Coalition. And I would love for you all to share, like if you were starting from scratch, what is the one thing you would tell yourself about starting a local homeless coalition? And does anybody want to jump in and go first, or should I like call in some volunteer someone?
I'll jump in. We started conducting the point in time count 4 years ago, which brought people together, and we just met monthly talking about the issues. watched people come and go over that time and found the ones that were really committed, and that's how we actually began and started with our board when we formed our 501c3. But it took some time to get to that point. But
yeah, thanks for sharing,
We
James.
started
Yeah,
out.
it does. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We started out in, gosh, I think it was 2014. And the impetus really was a couple of ladies who were running a women's shelter in town. And it was just the time that we needed to begin to pool resources and began to get people together who had a common goal. And that's how we got started. Now, again, 2012 to 2021, it's been, a long time. So there have been various iterations between then and now. We've learned a whole lot. There are a few of us who have stuck around for the entire length, and then some others who have come in, I'd say, within the past 3 to 4 years. And right now, I think that we're at a good place. But what it takes is the first person or a group of people who say, hey, we've got a problem. We need to be able to coordinate services. We need to be able to talk to one another to get the initial meeting together for folks to start talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, talking, that's like the biggest part of the beginning. So yeah, thank you both for sharing. And we're going to definitely have them answer questions at the end as well. So thank you all for being here and sharing. All right. And I like these pictures, by the way. I pulled these from y'all's Facebooks. All right. All right. So, all right. Thanks for closing that poll, Craig. So before we kind of dive in, I wanted to take a moment to kind of talk about how I don't know if it's our culture, like just the high achieving people tend to be really hard on themselves. But there's a lot of like emphasis on perfection and getting it right the first time. And having that kind of attitude can really keep us from persisting when we encounter obstacles, and obstacles are guaranteed in this work. Obstacles can discourage us from doing anything that we feel we are not already good at, or things can feel really inefficient at first. Like it's a lot of talking, like Denise said. So really, at the beginning, embracing like a beginner's mindset and establishing a culture where learning together is the primary objective kind of releases us from the pressure of perfectionism and really allows us to find like joy in building relationships and learning something new together. And I have like a maze on the slide because often I'm asked for like a checklist, and I have yet to see like a uniform system that like all the coalitions have gone through, which is why I kind of talk about getting started in like phases. And like I go phase 1, 2, and 3, but I've seen it done in different orders too. So keeping that in mind, in the back of your mind. All right, so okay, so common obstacles you'll encounter when trying to do this work. So I'm not going to go into all of these because honestly that could be its own webinar, and it probably should be. But to deal with these stumbling blocks you'll encounter, developing like a service leader oriented mindset can be really helpful. So a service leader oriented mindset means that you're supporting folks in advance of to advance the agenda or the shared vision we've agreed upon. So like the goal is to serve the group by holding to agreed upon common values or an agenda. So like as the facilitator or lead, you really want to like internalize your locus of control, take like nothing personally, and like never assume like malicious intent from the other folks that you're reaching out to. So for instance, like you set a meeting and literally no one shows up, which is like heartbreaking. But instead of saying like, oh, these people don't want to do it, like, you know, take some time to kind of like process that, because like I would be like really like, whoa, okay. But like really it could have been any reason of number of things. And I would recommend reaching out to folks individually to ask like when they could meet, or if there's like anything you could do to make it easier for them to attend. So it feels hard because it is hard. While the phases I'm about to talk about are very linear, these phases are intended to prepare you to address these stumbling blocks. So move on. But before we get there, I have a few reminders. Early on, expand your time horizon, exactly what James said earlier. Like, this takes time. So having that patience and understanding that social change takes stamina. To keep impatient, often you'll have like impatient, kind of more action-oriented folks, and to keep them engaged, you can plan like quick wins where you're able. So for instance, if your community does not have like a resource guide or a pocket guide for people experiencing homelessness, you all can come together to kind of create one that can be printed and handed out to people experiencing homelessness, like where they can go for commonly used resources. So kind of looking for those opportunities can be helpful. All right, so also in the long term, like the bulk of the first few years is building deeper relationships. And in order to facilitate that, I really recommend doing meeting composition analysis. So like just like looking at who's coming, who's keeps coming, who stops coming. And we'll talk a bit more about how to engage those folks. So who's not showing up to meetings, who is coming, how are people feeling included and involved? Have we been checking in with people? And are people with lived experience still showing up? If any of these things like change drastically, or like you notice patterns, it kind of tells you something is wrong and something needs to be changed. So making sure you still maintain like positive relationships with the people that stop coming by like kind of checking in with them when you're able to one-on-one to kind of get their feedback. Yeah, and so when you're engaging in this process, I would recommend being very transparent, very open and honest. Say you had like a bad relationship with an agency or an individual in the past, acknowledging that like the process used in the past has not been working, and that you hear them. And say like, here's where we were, here's where we are going to change, and here's how we're going to do it. So definitely, acknowledge the past and do not act like it didn't happen. That can go a long way in building relationship. Okay, so yeah. So you want to definitely keep your eye on the prize. We want to move from having like reactionary responses to homelessness, like COVID and the freeze and all that, like, well, I mean, that's a good intended thing. I'm inspired when people rise to the occasion. Constantly reacting is exhausting. And often like people can come up with solutions that are too simple, or they'll kind of act like issues are one-off events and like one silver bullet exists. But that's not the case. But acknowledging the urgency of the issue, but at the same time, and doing those actions that you can, where you can like have a reaction to like rise to the occasion, but like don't rush it, and like having high expectations can really backfire. So like as a group, we want to early on establish a common understanding that we're developing a strategy that takes years, and we need to acknowledge that we're going to have difficult conversations, and that's going to be a skill that we learn together, and that tension is not a bad thing. People disagreeing can still work together, and like just continuing that education to get community buy-in can go a long way. But like cutting people out because they don't immediately agree with you is not recommended. Okay, so phase one, outreach, engaging interest. So when you're doing this, keep in mind it can take some time, like usually like 1 to 3 years, like we said earlier, to get the right people to the table. And when you're doing this, you really want to like check your assumptions, manage expectations, and prioritize being very transparent. Yeah. Good. Okay. So don't forget to establish kind of roles at each meeting. You don't have to do this for every meeting, but when you kind of have like a small group getting together, you definitely want to establish the roles so that you're kind of setting an expectation that this is like all of us are going to be working on this collaboratively. So you don't, I would say if you're taking the lead, make yourself the facilitator every time, or another option is to say, hey, let's have these roles at each meeting, and then at each meeting, like a different person volunteers for this role. Like whichever, if that's what your group is open to. Make sure you're taking notes, kind of tracking what you're doing. And I highly recommend using like free online tools that all members can access. So things like there's a ton of free tools. Like Google Drive is really good. And there's also Trello, which is like a project management software, or Slack, which is like kind of like a project management software, but a little different. All right. Okay. So I like this when we use this template. It kind of keeps things the same every time. You could assign the roles first, then you do your round robin, like say how you're doing, and have like an icebreaker, and so on and so forth. But don't get too hung up on developing like structures like bylaws too early on. Form can follow function. So you want to like but you do want to avoid creating a culture where one person is doing all the work. So you can do that with like committees, which I don't know if you can see. Number 3, committee reports. Yeah, so leave that space for like forming work groups and committees to encourage others to champion specific efforts. All right, so in addition to tapping into your personal network when you're building the coalition and like recruiting members, you definitely want to do your community research in addition to making sure there's not an existing group doing this work already in your community. You can check out auntbertha.com or 211. I think I'm missing Texas from that, but that's fine. You can select the state. And existing HUD programs to see who you'd want to be reaching out to. You could also definitely prioritize connecting with your local homeless education liaison. And every school district is required to have a staff member designated a homeless education liaison. And they are tasked with counting the number of students experiencing homelessness in the school district and also connecting them and their families with resources. You also want to prioritize local governments, like building. You don't have to have like a member from the local government immediately on your coalition, but that would be amazing. But like just kind of like opening that communication, and like after you get like a small group going and you've really thought about it in a strategic way, it can be really helpful. Engaging like city council is really important because they set a lot of local ordinances that affect people's lives. But yeah, people with lived experience, people providing shelter and services, and public housing authorities. Yeah, and so we're not going to go through every member on this list because that would take a very long time. But there is more information on our website, and I'll discuss how to access that at the end. And you can also email me. All right, so rocking and rolling. Okay. So you don't want to just like start calling people without kind of thinking about it first. So first kind of get in touch with the people you're already talking to, like people in your personal network that you know would be on board with doing this work. You can come together and create a stakeholder engagement strategy. So you want to like kind of figure out like why they would benefit from being part of a coalition. So like their self-interest, when you can talk to them next, and you want to identify any pain points that might come up, and you want to definitely take those into account when you're cultivating your strategy. So some general recommendations around this work. You want to consider your timing of when you reach out to these folks. Action-oriented beginnings tend to like really bring a group together, and kind of the folks that are going to stick around it becomes more obvious who's going to stick around. So you can rally around an event like conducting the point in time count, which happens every January, and I think also in the summer. Or you can come together, like say there's an ordinance that's about to like criminalize homelessness in your local community. You can come together to like be a group voice for that. Yeah, stuff like that. And you also want to make sure you're recording your findings like in those free online tools, like shared access with all members. Let's see. And also when you reach out to these folks, ask them for contact recommendations. And I strongly recommend like meeting them where they are. So like we would do with clients, right? Like going to their agency is actually a really big deal. Like I was surprised how big of a deal it is. Like don't expect them to come to you, and don't encourage that attitude among your LHC members. Like really being open and okay with like going to that agency and like meeting them where they are can be really powerful in building that relationship. So again, manage their expectations. Don't promise too much. Like you're wanting to start a conversation around conducting like a point in time count in your community. And again, like prioritize transparency. Okay. All right, so just to wrap up, let's see. Engagement, member engagement is continuous ongoing activity basically through the life of the coalition, honestly. There's never going to be a point, I think, where everyone's at the table and like stays at the table, which is fine. Like that's how this goes. So usually having like a membership committee has been how coalitions address that. There's no magic number. Like I've worked with a coalition of one agency before, even though that's technically not the definition of a coalition. Like they worked really hard, they conducted a point in time count, and they built relationships that eventually led to them having like a really well flushed out coalition that has like a lot of like city buy-in and all that good stuff. So don't worry about like having like a magic number of people at the table before you become a coalition. Do what you're comfortable with. Yeah. And like I said, consider rallying events and do those pulse checks. Make sure you're like kind of checking in with folks as you go. All right. Okay. And let's see. Phase 2, initiate action. All right, so, and by action, I actually mean gathering data and holding meetings. So not quite exciting action, but definitely action. All right, so in the beginning, like say you've got a good group going, people are meeting regularly, like say monthly or so. You're spending like maybe like a few hours a week, like if you're leading it. If you're like a member, maybe like a couple hours between meetings, depends on like what you all are doing and how you're dividing responsibilities. But you want to make sure you establish like a common understanding of what homelessness looks like in your community and what resources exist to address that homelessness. So first you want to talk with who's just in the room, like who can provide what resources and what can they not provide. And you can, over the long term, like figure out strategies to engage folks that should put that information down. And yeah, like that can be like an engagement strategy. Like I saw a coalition use updating the resource list as a way to bring people to the table and talk about like what they wanted to do, and they did actually recruit a few members out of that activity. So resource lists can be surprisingly powerful. All right, okay. So member agency strengths and opportunities. This is I should have probably said gaps, not opportunities, because that can be I know the SWOT analysis, I think opportunities mean something different, but that's okay. You want to definitely let them know ahead of the meeting that you're going to discuss this when you like decide that this is what we're going to do this month. Let them know ahead of the meeting so that they can think about it. And we usually recommend for when it comes to like if there's an action item assigned to a member in the coalition, we recommend immediately after the meeting or as soon as you can follow up with who is assigned what action item, and this is the date you're gonna like report on the outcome of the action item. And then like halfway between your like next meeting and that last meeting, kind of reach out again and say, hey, like in 2 weeks, you are going to report on this action item. Like, were you able to get to it? Is there anything we can do to support you? And then like a few days before, say, hey, don't forget, like we have this action item that we're going to talk about. Are you still able to talk about it at the meeting? Seems like a lot. You can schedule meetings in like Gmail, so that's why like, or you can schedule emails in Gmail, so you don't have to remember to do it. You can literally just set the time and date, do it all in one fell swoop, which is awesome. All right, and and depending on the number of people that you're talking to, think of holding these meetings in like small group discussions with about 4 to 6 people per meeting. So it's okay to have the same meeting with different folks. That's totally fine. And I highly recommend like small group discussions because it kind of like balances out like the power, like one person isn't like kind of taking over the meeting, and it allows for more in-depth conversation, especially if you have like a massive group of people. And then after those small focus group meetings are done, you can have a meeting where everyone comes together and you review it, kind of talk about the outcomes. And then even at that meeting, you can like have them break out into like 4 to 6 groups of 4 to 6 people and like discuss the strengths they see and the opportunities they see. And I'll touch more on that in a little bit. But also continue mapping your landscape. Where do you see people experiencing homelessness? Where are they at? And so this is like a sample like spreadsheet. You can also like physically map it if you, like on Google Maps or something if you'd like to. One mistake in this slide is that you do not want to use names. I don't ever use identifying information in this kind of map. I did not catch that before I used it as an example, but just as a note. Okay, so we're chugging along on time. Okay, so you're mapping the landscape. You want to discuss what assets your community has and whether it's like an opportunity for education or advocacy if that presents itself. Okay. So here's like an example. Say like your local news has covered homelessness in like a positive way, or like they were very aware that like the issue is like housing affordability in your area. You might have a city councilor who has lived experience of homelessness, or an attitude or a mayor that's open to kind of like discussing homelessness and digging into solutions instead of just like having law enforcement pick them up and drop them off at the other side of the county or city line. So these are really common like stumbling blocks, like no homeless services exist in the community. There's not a lot of interest. There's physical distances. Some of these can be resolved easily, like if it will take like someone an hour and a half to drive to a meeting, I highly recommend having online meetings. That's like the one good thing about COVID. People got more used to having online meetings. And you can kind of generate interest in creating an LHC over time by like building those relationships and stuff like that. Okay, so if it's productive, and I stress if it's productive, you can analyze your landscape maps. So you don't want to do it right after you do them. You want to leave time for reflection, and like also like breaking out into those small groups is like really recommended. So usually when people look at those lists, they can kind of see like the obvious like service duplication. So say you find like there are a lot of agencies that offer a meal in one cluster, but no one is offering assistance for applying for like government assistance like food stamps or disability income. And members may not even be aware of what assistance exists. So that's like an opportunity to become a platform for education, and you can all meet and like watch webinars together and then discuss them after as a group. So definitely I want to acknowledge that it might not be productive to analyze the map yet. Sometimes when folks do this, they get really frustrated and meetings can turn into venting sessions because there's no resources, there's no funding. And when you see that, it's becoming more of like a venting session, like people are just upset there's like nothing here, quote. Like that's a time to like stop the meeting and like table the discussion. And then like I would recommend at the next meeting, only looking at the strengths, just ignore the gaps. Just look at your strengths and have small group discussions to discuss where you can go with the strengths you have. Yeah, so like a good example from, what am I doing on time? Stephenville, like Erath County is like really rural. They had groups of church, they had like a network of ministries that were already working together. They had like no homeless services. They probably, I don't know if they have a social worker in their county. But like they were able to harness that existing network to form like a program to or like give out rental assistance. Yeah. So yeah, so they didn't really have resources, but they'd had those relationships with each other and they found their strengths. All right, so I'm gonna take a moment. How are we doing on time? Ooh. Okay, so like a little less than 30 minutes. I think we're good. If I'm going to take a moment to kind of breathe and drink some water. So if there were any questions folks had for our guests, the LHC leads, or for me, or anything about the content we talked about so far, you can go ahead and drop it in the chat, and I'm going to taking some water.
Jen, I just want to reiterate everything that you have said. I think you wrote the playbook from our experience because we basically have gone through everything that you have depicted. After we started our nonprofit and with the faithful board members that we collected, well, two of them, our secretary and treasurer, had to resign after about 6 months of getting started because of new jobs, new positions. So you run into situations, but we found new replacements that we're going to be putting in place. But you're right, it takes some time. I want to reiterate one other thing that really pushed our group of volunteers into a homeless coalition and with THN, and that's the letter that we received from the president of THN inviting us to be the Texas Balance of State Continuing Care Agency. That is when we actually began starting investigating what a local homeless coalition really was and what we needed to do, and we had to make a decision whether we wanted to do that. And once we did, then we really pushed us over the edge to go ahead and start taking steps to become a more official agency.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, that the experience that you had was very common in coalitions, and it's like it can be. I always say, like, I feel like I'm letting the air out of folks' tires when they come to me initially and say, like, oh, we're gonna we have all these ideas, and it's great because like seeing people so passionate is like really inspiring, and like really it's my favorite part of the job. But I've found that like kind of saying, oh, okay, like slow down, like we need to like hit the brakes a little bit, has been like the best advice I could probably give to folks. So yeah. Oh, and also you're referring to the letter of commitment from Local Homeless Coalition. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Great.
At the stage where we are, I'm looking at the things that you just shared with us. I'm thinking, wow, we could look at that to kind of revamp some of the things that we're doing, kind of do a self-assessment. Where are we? Where have we come from? You know, how are things going now? What do we need to do to improve? And so there's a lot of strategies that you're sharing that regardless of how long the coalition has been in existence, we can always go back to those to help strengthen what we're doing in our communities.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, yeah. I'm glad. Glad that
And actually, this
yeah, and
I want to show this to my new advisory board because they need a training, and this is perfect for that.
Mm-hmm. That's very good.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Cool. Oh, yeah. And also thank you for bringing up that like even existing coalitions need to kind of do that work that, you know, what can be sometimes considered like entry level work. But like it really is ongoing and you can definitely use these strategies. So yeah, thank y'all. All right. I got water down. Okay, so in addition to all the work we've talked about, after you gathered your group, you started analyzing what resources you have in your community, where and what homelessness looks like in your community, kind of got your list of who to reach out to as you go along. You also start gathering baseline data. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the point in time count is an activity that's required from every local homeless coalition, and it's really important because it is a census or a count, right? Like the name is in there, it's in the name, but of the people experiencing homelessness. And then you can also get demographic information, like how many veterans do you have? How many people that have been experiencing homelessness for more than a year do you have? How many women, children, families, single folks. It gives you like a clearer picture of the folks that you are hoping to build programs for and with. And also the housing inventory count is a required activity. We don't have coalitions necessarily conduct the housing inventory count. Now we like reach out to agencies individually, and like Kira Henderson, our awesome data coordinator, does that. But we definitely want to make sure that coalitions understand what the housing inventory count is and like how they can use that information to better like get an idea of what's going on in their communities. So for instance, like housing inventory count basically counts the number of beds available to people experiencing homelessness, like how much shelter capacity do you have. And you can like compare the numbers, like the count, the point in time counts of the people, and then the housing inventory counts of the beds. And do they match up? Is there like a huge gap? Are there a lot of people still experiencing homelessness when there's like a lot of openings in your shelter? Or are shelters always full and there's still a lot of people experiencing homelessness outside? You can also use local agency data, whatever information they collect. And I also really recommend 211counts.org. Like I only recently discovered this tool, and it reports like the requests for assistance over time for your community, which is like really interesting, and it's been pretty cool. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And then also once you've like cultivated a relationship with like a few or one homeless education liaison, definitely incorporating their numbers into your like community outreach and education. I will take actually I won't take a second to explain the difference, but basically like homeless education liaisons, they go by a different definition, like a broader definition of homelessness than HUD funded projects. HUD does not include people that are doubled up or like couch surfing, but the Department of Education does. So having those homeless education liaisons and their counts can be really powerful in community education because it gives them a better sense of who is unstably housed or how many people that is.
I
Okay.
highly agree with that and recommend that. I came into this work by being a homeless um, liaison for my school district. And so that it's what lit the fire under me. And again, there are differences, but still we've got lots of youth who need help. And sometimes it's really hard to make all that, come to pass as it needs to. But the homeless liaisons really can be some, times feet on the ground for you to find out some folks that you may not know about who are already.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Denise. Yeah, she worked most like, was it 30 years? Or I don't want to out you, but but yeah, you worked in education.
10 years
Yeah,
in
so that's
10 years in
yeah,
that work and 34 years in education. Yeah.
nice. Yeah, yeah. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Um, so this is a sample community data tool, which I can share afterward. It's kind of like in the process of being heavily edited. Um, so I didn't want to necessarily share it because it's going to change, but I can still share it if people are interested. You can just reach out to me via email. But quite often these are compiled by individual agencies, like they do the research, like the grant writer researches, like the community data. But I really recommend having one of the LHC like mutually reinforcing activities, which like it's just a fancy way of saying like it's an activity that like benefits all of us and supports our work for each other. But like I recommend compiling this as a group because it creates a unified awareness of community resources among stakeholders and like what the numbers are in the community. Just having that shared awareness can be really helpful and powerful. And you can even have like, that can be one of like the work group activities you do, or if you have a lot of folks kind of chomping at the bit saying like, we're just talking all the time, let's do something. You can be like, okay, do you hopefully like doing internet research or calling people and asking them questions? We're going to have a meeting where we come together with our laptops, divide up the work, like the information, and do that research. And you can like fill it out collaboratively in Google Sheets. So it can be like a really invigorating meeting. I've had meetings like that and it felt like, oh yeah, we're getting stuff done. Like I liked it. Yeah, I liked it. And you can also do this over like a few meetings because it is a lot of information and the research can take some time. So again, it is being kind of reviewed and edited, but I can share it with you if you'd like to. Okay, so once you've kind of gathered your coalition of the willing, the people that keep coming to meetings, I find that steering committees kind of organically form themselves because the same like 5 or however many people keep coming to the meetings. So you want to like grab those people, hold on to them, make them part of your steering committee. And then if you decide as a group that you're ready to form a coalition, you can come up with a coalition name. I recommend having like a homeless coalition of county name. I mean, you don't have to, you can also do like county name homeless coalition. I just say that because I've had some feedback from coalitions that after they formed like say Ellis County Homeless Coalition, though this didn't happen in Ellis County, like they got contacted by the county saying like, hey, you're not like a sanctioned group, you're not like, this makes it look like you represent the county and you don't. So you can do homeless coalition of, X county. You can decide how often to meet. I recommend having like the steering committee meet either monthly or bi-monthly, depending on like capacity, and then having like the general membership meet like quarterly, so they don't feel like, oh, I'm going to these meetings every month. Like that can happen where they go to the meetings every month and they're more kind of like chomping at the bit, and so they don't want to just kind of sit around and talk more. You don't have to have them come to every meeting. You can decide where to meet. Again, I like highly recommend having like online meetings because Texas is huge. These counties are massive, and like it's easier to engage people in like online meetings. But if you do want to do online or in-person meetings, you usually like having the meeting rotate like among agencies, and that doesn't always work. Some people are like, well, I'm not going to remember who to go to next month, and that's totally valid. But we found in some communities rotating the meeting actually had like more people were likely to go because they knew that their agency, they wouldn't have to go anywhere 1 month. So they seem to like that. So you want to determine who the chair is or who the lead will be. And like that's another requirement of homeless coalitions. You do have to like designate a person that is like the primary contact and essentially the lead. And we also recommend having a secondary contact and all that good stuff. This is the more dry governance stuff that can not too exciting. But let's see. You definitely want to spend or plan to spend like a few hours on this a week, roughly, if you're the coalition lead, depending. It depends on like how many people you're trying to engage, like as you're like facilitating the action of the group, your work can grow like if the numbers grow, because like Grace said earlier, like reaching out to individuals to do kind of like those pulse checks, check in with them, like if people stop attending, calling them and asking like, hey, like I know it's okay that you weren't able to come to the meetings, but like I just wanted to check in and see if like how things are going, like get feedback that you have, because like engaging folks that stop coming to meetings can be like really powerful, and like they can have insight into like things that maybe need to be changed, or you're like maintaining that relationship, so maybe when they have the capacity to join later, they can jump in. Okay, and so one more tip, I recommend, oh wait, no, I said that already, the like making sure folks with action items are contacted regularly can be really helpful. Okay, so also like when you have your steering committee, and actually you can do this with any committee, or like even with, if you just want to do it with all the members of the coalition, you can do that too. But kind of inventory the skills that folks have. For instance, like, is there someone who really likes conducting research and doing like literature reviews, like what should we read collectively as a group, or like what webinars should we watch collectively as a group? Is there someone who has a lot of experience in advocacy, writing, communications, like relationship building for your like membership chair, volunteer recruitment, because you have to recruit volunteers for the point in time count, marketing, who loves doing meeting facilitation, who likes taking notes, all that good stuff. This can really help you kind of suss out who should be pursued for what activities. And this also can help identify champions for like specific tasks. Yeah. Okay. So, all right, let's see. Oh, and this is, you can go to our website, thn.org, and this is how you find us, or like the local homeless coalition page, which I did not put on there intentionally, because I've had other webinars where folks kind of went off and looked at the website and were like asking me questions about the website, and I was like, I have no idea how did you get on that topic? So thank you for not having that, or like having the patience with me for not putting that in there. But if you go to our landing page, this is how you can find local homeless coalition stuff. And if you're interested in requesting more information, in addition to like just sending me a note here, you can email me at jen@thn.org, or you can go to the LHC page and request information through a form. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna take a minute to drink some more water and check in, see how we're doing. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Oh, nice. See things being dropped in the resources being dropped in the chat. Cool. So folks who are interested in setting up LHC as far as my capacity. Ooh, that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up, Sam. Thank you. So the question is if I can set out expectations for how I can support folks who are interested in setting up an LHC as far as like my capacity. Okay, so I've learned a lot of lessons over the course of this job, and I think the most important one is definitely drawing those boundaries, like setting those expectations, because I used to volunteer to do outreach to communities for those individuals that were interested in starting an LHC, and I can't do that anymore. It's so much work. It takes so much time, and it always took me longer than I said it would. It's a lot. So I do kind of want to set that expectation that you're going to do the initial you're going to be doing the outreach to the necessary folks in your community. I can definitely guide you. I can go through forget where that list is, but that long list of the potential stakeholders to engage, and I can tell you more about why you should engage them and what numbers they're interested in, or why they would be interested in being part of a coalition. But I cannot do the work for you because I was pulling my hair out. And it was
it takes one passionate person to get it started. And then I would recommend also a Facebook page that you can put that information out there on, find out who actually reacts to it, and then get them together and start meeting together regularly. But find some focal point that would get everybody's reaction and start a Facebook page, group page. I see a lot of things start around here that way. So.
Oh, cool. I didn't know that. It's good. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, regular meetings. Yeah, regular meetings are definitely a big lesson in keeping coalitions active. I didn't think I would have time, but I can touch on this because we have a little bit of extra time. Coalitions are only required to meet quarterly, so that's 4 times a year. While I definitely recommend having a steering committee that's coming together to make sure that the group, the steering committee who has demonstrated that they want to do the work, having them meet more regularly, and then also kind of find a way to keep engaging those general members to see if you can kind of lighten the load. Let me see what I have. That can be a really and I kind of trailed off, but having those general members able to attend the steering committee, so having open steering committee meetings where general members can pop in if they would like to, and then also having working meetings, work group meetings, making sure you can finding ways you can have those small focus group meetings. Trying to remember what I had said earlier. Oh yeah, when you're analyzing your data and all that good stuff.
One of the things I'd also recommend too is, especially small community or large counties with smaller communities, is get some of the churches together, people that are also interested in helping homeless people, come together and discuss the needs in the county and those they're meeting in their communities, and just come together, like you said, figure out a way that the churches can help with those homeless people in those areas. And that's the best place to start, because people know people around their churches and around where they're at. You find out churches are doing a lot of things that they need to be part of your coalition, and understand that they could probably do a better job if they were all working together instead of in a little here and a little there. And exposing the needs for the larger area a lot of times is you find that out by just getting the smaller groups together, discussing what they're seeing and what they're experiencing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'll take a breath to see if anybody else has a question. And if you don't, I'm going to go back to something I kind of passed over because I didn't know if I would have time.
Another suggestion that I've just learned that would be, I thought would be a good way to start. I don't know if you're familiar with ourcalling.com. That's an app that can be downloaded on your phone for homeless people, and you start identifying all the assistance for homeless people and putting their locations on there, and you actually can get a contract with them so that you can take pictures of encampments and put the locations on there, and typically they would work through police departments so that it's we're going to use that to help us this next year with our pit count. But police departments also see a lot of homeless people, and to have somebody who's interested in working with them and organizing all the police departments using that app would be a great way to start and identify your needs in the area.
Yeah, and also like making sure that you're wait, so this app is already available to exist like
Yes, there is a homeless shelter or a day service called Our Calling, and the pastor there is also an IT guy, and it's going nationwide. And he typically contracts with police departments, but it's a real small, it's pennies. The cost is what he charges for that, but it's based upon your count that you have for your area, your homeless count or homeless population. But it assists police departments to keep track of where they're at, and they can send you the information to where locations and have somebody designate a street outreach and start it that way.
Gotcha. Okay, so now I understand. So the police already have this information and they would be sharing it with you.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Because I was going to caution against the other way around. I would definitely.
No, it's you work with the police departments.
Yeah,
Who get
yeah.
that.
I would. So that's fine. Like if the police already have that information and then they're like sharing that with you, that's awesome. But like I would caution against like the other way around where you're finding the encampments and then informing the police because, and not that this happens in every community, it's just like the worst case scenario that I've heard. Basically like a coalition, and I talked to a few people that have experienced this in different communities over the years, like they conducted the point in time count and there were some like encampments that were like really well hidden, and then like they shared like where that was with like everyone, and somehow it got back to like local police, and basically they went in and broke up the encampment, ran warrant checks, and then like their relationship that service provider had worked for years to develop with those people in that encampment was literally destroyed in like a day. So like really when we're like centering the people experiencing homelessness, if you already have like a existing relationship with like an encampment or something, definitely I guess be very like transparent about like what you're doing, like, and the point in time count guidance has more on this topic, but like I just wanted to share that like worst case scenario so that you can kind of like, the police don't already know about an encampment, don't just give that information out, because like those folks might not want them to know that they're there, like, and we're here for them, then their privacy should be respected. But again, that's a worst case scenario. That's like not that might not happen in every community. But,
it was really helpful during the freeze because we were able to
develop.
locate more people because police departments knew where they were at.
Yeah. 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 So yeah, if the police already know, then yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's part of what makes this tricky. And I see we have our third local homeless coalition lead join us, Tegan DeBrock in Hayes County. Hayes County Homeless Coalition. Yeah, thanks for joining us. And earlier I had asked the other leads if they were starting from scratch, just starting over, what advice would you give yourself? And if you want a minute to think about it, I can talk about something else really quick and then come back to you if you want.
Yeah, give me a minute to think about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So earlier I kind of referenced building buy-in to best practices. And so like I'm going to take a moment to kind of talk about one of those best practices, which is called housing first. So in communities across the US, actually let me define it first. Housing first, it's a homeless assistance approach that prioritizes providing permanent housing to people experiencing homelessness. So instead of like building more shelters, which a person staying in a shelter is still experiencing homelessness. So we want to prioritize ending homelessness by taking this housing first approach. So you can end a person's homelessness by putting them in a home or like a apartment, like permanent housing, right? And you also can provide, or we recommend like providing like wraparound services. It's a platform from which they can like get stability in housing, and then they can pursue personal goals and improve their quality of life. So this model really eliminates systemic barriers it eliminates systemic barriers to housing and gives people the housing stability and wraparound services needed to address their needs on their own time frame. And you can learn more at this website. I'll drop it in the chat. But like making the case for housing first in like smaller communities can be really a big challenge, because like the first thing they think about is like the costs associated with housing. Like we're just going to give these people housing and not require them to do anything for that. Like, but you can come back with like a really strong argument. So across the U.S., like the housing first approach to chronic homelessness has consistently been less costly and more effective than relying on other systems like hospitals and law enforcement to address chronic homelessness. So like it doesn't matter the community size, it always saves the community money. So for example, in West Allis, Wisconsin, which is a town of about 60,000 people, they housed people that were cycling in and out of hospitals and jails that were clearly experiencing chronic homelessness. And those people like individually would typically rack up like $50,000 a year in hospital bills alone, which is being paid for with like local tax dollars. So the cost of renting them an apartment and providing wraparound services was between $1,200 and $1,800 per program participant per month, which ended up saving taxpayers between $28,000 and $35,500 per participant per year, which is a lot. So additionally, the program saw greater success than high barrier programs, because folks were more likely to stay engaged with the program if they weren't required to like be sober, and they weren't required to participate in classes and stuff like that. And in one really remarkable case, like a woman that struggled to maintain sobriety for like years entered a housing first based permanent supportive housing program in Utah, and she ended up getting sober, and she had been literally for decades kind of living on the street, struggling with alcoholism. So, oh no. Oh, I can share the resources. I can drop those links because I guess my sound was breaking up, but Tegan, are you ready?
Ready, thank you. So, I mean, I kind of feel like we're still kind of in a starting place. We started last October with our homeless coalition of Hays County, and there's one big regret I had from our very first meeting. I would recommend, whether you're a big or small community, not spending a significant portion of time in that first meeting about what is an LHC, what are we doing here to start a coalition, on introductions of organizations. We scheduled out about 20 minutes to do it, and we thought, we have a good structure for this, and we'll facilitate it well, and we'll make sure we don't go over time. And it ended up taking twice that amount of time. If you're a smaller community, most of the people probably already know each other in the room, and if you're a larger community, it would probably be best to do a separate networking or social event after the fact, after people understand what they're coming to the table to do, because I feel like we could have used that time a lot more effectively to really get hold of people's attention, which is the other point, to make sure that you're jumping on top of the momentum that you build when you kind of initiate this conversation, or if making a coalition is part of a conversation that's already been initiated, making sure that it's including whatever has come before it and continuing that work so people can push that energy forward. Yeah, and then the one thing I think we did do really well was making a sort of flexible space, not necessarily a non-committal space, but a space where people were like, I can't commit to being, an officer or a voting board member, could still plug in, stay in the contact list, and join a committee. We kept our committees pretty informal so that people feel like they can hop in and out as they can, and I've noticed, I think, higher participation because of that than what we would have had if they were very formal and structured.
That's really good feedback, and I wish I could have more time to scroll through these chats. But who brought it up? Joshua McAvee. I think I'm saying your last name wrong, but they suggested having social events after your meetings. Yeah, that is, or maybe somebody said that earlier, but yeah, that's a really good recommendation too. Creating that informal space to kind of like deepen your relationships and get to know each other more on a personal level. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Thanks. So, yeah, those informal spaces. So, Tegan, yeah, that's what I get for reading and trying to listen at the same time. Yeah. Cool. Nice. All right. That's nice. Yeah, taking time to, definitely giving yourself plenty of time, not rushing. Always a good recommendation. So yeah, being patient with yourself and like the members of the coalition. Like we talked about earlier. All right, let's see. All right, see if there are any other questions that we missed. Here we go. Thanks. Oh, and another good suggestion that I just realized, like being comfortable with silence. Like I used to be very uncomfortable with silence, especially when I was facilitating meetings. But then I learned I needed to be quiet more often because like only allowing for like a space, like a second or like a beat for people to jump in is usually not long enough. So yeah, definitely finding comfort in that silence, like people are processing. Definitely a good recommendation. All right. So, oh yeah, thanks for sharing, Denise. Cool. Oh, and we also, on our LHC page, we have links to the social media sites that existing coalitions have on our contacts list. So thank you for sharing. And also you can check out other folks on our website, which I should probably post. And we get like a copy of the chat. So after this meeting, I can go through and harvest all these links that are being shared, so you don't have to kind of in a rush copy and paste. You can send those out. All right. So unless anyone, I think I accidentally did something. Sorry about that, but I was gonna put up my contact information, but I did something weird. Help. How do I get back to where, okay, there we go. I just have to click and drag, I guess. Interesting. Help, Craig. Thank you, Craig. This is why I don't like doing anything in Adobe Connect without Craig. Oh yeah, and like sneak peek into the future, like organizing for impact, that can be like a separate webinar, or we have about 5 minutes left. I don't know if anybody wants to hear about that really quickly. It would be like a really brief overview because we have 5 minutes. Or we can adjourn. If anybody wants to hear more, you can. But my voice is pretty hoarse, honestly. But if you to get in touch with me, you can reach me at jen@thn.org. Yeah. Well, I'll let y'all hang out for a minute, see if you have any more questions or comments, suggestions. I'll have a good group of people to harness information from. So, appreciate that.
Quick question. Would it be possible that we could prepare a Zoom that we could, a lot of these coalition members or leaders could get together and talk about areas they struggle with or areas they may be able to help with? Because I would like to talk with some other agency or coalitions, especially ones that are starting to receive some funding now, and as far as grant writing and communications, advertising, things like that we do.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad you brought that up. We do have like a platform that can be used for that. We have like LA for Local Homeless Coalition conference calls. Right now we only have them quarterly, but I'm trying to like build out more like peer-to-peer support opportunities for y'all. So like those LHC conference calls have turned largely into like us sharing information with folks, but I can definitely develop more spaces for you all to come together and exchange information.
Okay. Yeah. That'd be great.
Cool.
That'd be great.
All right. Yeah.
There's always something to learn from someone.
So yeah, thank you. Thank you for hanging in there. I know an hour and a half is a long time to be listening. But yeah, thank you all so much. And I hope you all have a great day. And thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everybody.
And we'll hang out for a few more minutes just in case somebody types something in the chat. We've got like 2 minutes left. But you can head out as you need to. Thanks for joining. Yeah,
Hi, Jen. Thanks so much. It was great.
It's cool to see you in person. Yeah. Yeah.
Good to see you too.
Very cool.
Looks like that is it. I'm gonna go ahead and close the room so we can get the reports and the recordings going.
Thanks, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
My face hurts.